The Breakdown.
We had the chance to listen to The Best Part About Being Human by Bearings. This is the Auto Outfit's third studio album, arriving the 18th of August via Pure Noise Records. The Best Part, Sam, About Being Human, consists of 10 tracks and is the much anticipated follow-up to 2020's Hello, It's You LP. And I just wanted to sort of add some extra knowledge about this album, just some words the band had to say. There were some songs on the last record with synths, backing tracks. This time we leaned into what we knew we would have the most fun playing live. 2 guitars, bass, drums, and a vocal.
That's interesting.
So this is essentially this band's way of stripping it back a little bit.
Right, stripping it back in a way that, in theory...
Back to their roots.
Right, which I feel like is something a lot of pop-punk bands seem to be doing this year, is, running it back.
Yeah.
Running it back to capture a certain era or feeling.
How much of that do you think is driven by finally being able to play live again for a bit? And
it's probably partially the reason, for sure, right? And I think maybe a little bit of it is as well differentiating themselves from a lot of what pop punk is to most people nowadays, and what that has grown to become. A lot of the mall pop punk bands like the MGKs, the Mod Suns, the Huddies, the Avril Lavigne. I think that bands are trying to sort of show it's almost like they've had to go out and make alternative pop punk again.
it feels like they've got their backs against the wall in a really interesting way.
Right. In a sense, I don't think it's one of those cases where it's oh, hey, you better show up. Otherwise, we're going to replace you.
Huddy's going to dethrone you, boys.
Mm-hmm. Huddy's going to replace you on the factory line. But it does feel like they're trying to capture a certain feeling, and holy fucking shit does Bearings capture it with this record.
Exceedingly well. They do it exceedingly well. As far as what this band set out to accomplish, if they were just hey, we want to write one of the best summer albums of the year, they did it.
I think I'd go further. I think this is one of the best pop punk albums I've heard in a decade.
Really?
I think Bearings are exemplary here.
I like this take, for the record.
I had the same feeling with this as it's every few years, I hit one of those albums in the genre that's just I remember when I discovered Adornment by Grayscale, and I was oh, holy shit, pop punk's actually pretty good. And then a couple years later was oh, The Peace and the Panic by Neck Deep. Oh my God. A couple years after, those tickets to Bad Outfall for MGK. And then a couple years after that, we get this fucking Bearings album, and I'm holy shit, talk about a tone setter. This is absolutely a magnum opus. This is everything else will gravitate around this level of good for me.
Yeah. Man, you talk about magnum opus, just shortly going back to our conversation about Movements and what we remembered about their 2020 album. I remember less about Bearings' 2020 album.
Yeah, it's another one of those things where it's man, I remember that fucking music video where they pretended to be a boy band, and it was so goddamn funny.
That was funny.
And it really made me fall in love with the band, right? I had heard them prior, and I felt like they had such a completely different energy. They were maybe similar to a Movements. They were a little more depressing. They were a little sadder. And then they sort of came out of that, and they're we have a slightly different energy now. But you're right. This album almost completely eviscerates everything else they've done in the past from my memory. Yeah, it's just that level of quality.
I don't know, and this is just I don't know, this is, talk about shaking up the scenery, literally. This band is shaking things up with this record. Immediately they jump out to me as one of the more exciting pop punk bands that we have right now. And then for people who haven't listened to Bearings, if you start with this record, to me, the best way that I can describe it is it sounds like Ann Arbor and the Maine trying to write Neck Deep songs.
Okay.
And I love all three of those bands.
I'm gonna follow that through line.
Yeah. But like it also has like a very old school energy to it at times. Like you can definitely tell a lot of it's just definitely those four instruments, you know, guitars, bass, drums, vocals as well. And that's not to say that like one of the reasons I thought maybe that last record was a bit on the forgettable side wasn't because some of the risks that the band took by incorporating different things like synth or whatever. It just didn't click with me. And I'm not saying that like the reason this one does is because it's more back to their roots. It just happens to be that way.
I just think this is one of those things where it's like Bearings have dropped something where it's almost like a perfect time and place type beat, where it's like I needed this exact type of record and they swung in with the absolute best possible version of it.
I think so.
And that's why it connected so much. And there's also something about this that feels so like wholesome and real and down to earth, where it almost feels like music from a bygone era, not in a sense that it has a nostalgic sound to it, but that a lot of the sort of subject matter and how they speak and how they talk, it just feels real world. Like it just feels like, hey, I'm going out on dates. Hey, I'm in love with this girl. Hey, so-and-so let me down. Like, hey, you know, like that time we like went out and got ice cream and then we like took a walk on the beach. Like it just feels all tangible and a real like nice, and none of it, it's almost like escapism in like a really strange way, almost like watching like an old romantic comedy or something. You know what I mean? It's like nobody's swiping left and right on TikTok. Nobody's like lost in the absolute misery of anything.
Got two apps mixed up.
Swiping left and right on TikTok? No, that. Tinder. Oh my God, you're so right, right. But yeah, like none of this feels modern. It all feels like antiquated and nostalgic in a really like soothing way.
Yeah. Like it's almost set in the 90s or something.
Yeah, a little bit. But you know, and I say that without saying like it's not like I'm trying to say, oh, this sounds like Blink-182 or Green. Like don't get the wrong idea. It's not the sound. It's it's not necessarily the subject matter, but it's almost like an aesthetic that it has.
The atmosphere of it. Man, you say that, and like something that I had in my head about this record is that it just felt like very nostalgic, and I couldn't really place why, but like
it just feels like it's almost like a bygone era type thing. You know, it's almost like it's almost like listening to the Beach Boys or something, you know? It was like, oh, simpler times, right?
Yeah.
It was like, remember when you just cared about like meeting girls and hanging out with like friends and stuff like that, you know? It's just something about it is very like calming and soothing and familiar. It's just, it captures a feeling extremely well.
You're not wrong. Like the stakes of this album aren't anything crazy. It's very much just like first love, whatever, going on dates,
it doesn't
walking on the
overthink
beach, whatever.
Anything. It's just like the verse, one of the craziest fucking hooks you've heard all year. Yep. And then, you know, play it out like over and over and over again. And it's just like that could get old if they didn't nail it every goddamn time.
Every time. Some instant standouts for me, Sam. Ocean Dream, and I'm going to let you explain why.
All right, so we've talked about it a lot, but like the one way to take your song from like pretty good to absolutely magnificent is to just put a little like splash of saxophone in it, and it's just like the level of, it's just like it's a sexiness that it's like only acquired by incorporating this specific instrument, right?
It's helping make your song go from like regular Saiyan to Super Saiyan.
Yeah, that's precisely correct. And like it's specifically these pop punk bands who like they just dip their toes in adult contemporary a little bit and it hits so fucking well.
Yes.
Ocean Dream is like, it's just such a lovely track. Like it's just such a beautiful fucking song. It's almost like perfectly described by its namesake.
Yes. Yeah, it's very
in the same way that the whole album feels almost like weirdly perfectly described by its namesake.
Well, like, yes.
And they touch on it. Like there's a specific line in another song that like very like pointedly says like the best part about being human is like watching like your heart like
I forget what the exact.
Yeah, I forget
they do
like, what
say
the
it though.
exact
They
line
do.
is, but they like sum up exactly what they're going for so
Yeah.
well in like a singular line, and like it sums up the entirety of the album in that way too.
I think it was like the best part about being human is feeling alive.
It's something like
Something
feeling
like
love.
that.
It's like something a little bit like that.
Some other like standout moments on this that I wanted to shout out. The last two tracks, in particular, how they end really stuck out to me. So I Want to Heal injects some really strong atmosphere that's maybe not entirely like some heavier atmosphere, I guess. I don't know. By dropping this, or not heavy, I don't know. It drops like this sweet little audio clip over like this sexy little riff that plays out the track, and like immediately like that stays with me for the rest of the album. I really like that moment. And then Human, the closing track on here, transitions to like this emotional acoustic part that really contrasts the high-spirited, melodic and riff-driven contents of the rest of the project. Like Shake Up the Scenery, Gone So Gone, like these are all very breezy songs, very high energy, and then for this album to just go out on something that's unlike the rest of the album, I think just stands out to me.
It's honest to God like a summer defining record. Like I listened to this 40 times today just in my car, and like it's like 30 minutes.
Did Bearings
tops.
save summer?
Okay, maybe Bearings didn't save summer, but you and I have talked a lot about the Canadian pop punk scene off air, and obviously they've got like they're in a down year, right? Like Sum 41 called it a day. That's pretty much like the defining pop punk band from Canada, right?
We're waving the white
followed
flag.
up by like Simple Plan, who are like quietly on their way out as well. And it's like somebody had to come up and like hold the mantle up for an entire fucking country, and Bearings said like, hold up, let us cook. And they cooked so hard, they made not just one of the best Canadian pop punk albums of all time, but literally one of the best pop punk albums I've ever heard in my whole life. This is like one of the hardest 5 stars I'll give all year. There's nothing about this album that I didn't ever not enjoy. I simply loved every single second of it, and then it started over again, and that fucking love followed through from track 1 to track 10, and that cycle repeats itself over and over. Like,
Did I hear you give this a 5 out of 5?
5 out of 5, absolute fucking masterpiece. Like, pop punk bands will spend their whole life trying to write a record this good and never even come close. Like, we get one of these like literally every like 3 years.
Yeah.
And this is Bearings year.
Bro, Canada from out of nowhere.
Canada's so up right now. It's absolutely insane. Canadian scene fucking out of control right now.
I'm a slightly cooler on it. I'm gonna give it a 4.5.
Okay, all right.
Because like
I'm still happy with that.
Like if I'm at least like, they're really different records, but if I'm matching this up with the Movements album, I'm not definitively gonna say that I liked it better. So they're 4.5s for me.
The news.